Mike Danton's story is unlike that of any typical NHL player. He was once a promising young prospect who, by the age of 23, found himself in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Years later, he returned to professional hockey, an improbable comeback rooted in personal transformation and the unwavering desire to rewrite his narrative. In examining Danton's journey from a troubled upbringing to the St. Louis Blues locker room, then a prison cell, and eventually back onto the ice, we discover a saga of ambition, loyalty, manipulation, self-discovery, and ultimately redemption. Born as Mike Jefferson on October 21st, 1980 in Brampton, Ontario, he was raised in a family that shared the common Canadian dream of seeing a child flourish in hockey. Growing up, he showed a fierce competitive edge that, even at a young age, separated him from his peers. Coaches noted not only his raw talent, but also his scrappy, fearless style. Small for a future NHLer, Danton, still Jefferson at the time, channeled every ounce of tenacity into proving he could hold his own with bigger players. He approached the game with a willingness to fight in the corners, battle along the boards, and stand up for himself and his teammates. However, it was also in these formative years that a complicated figure entered his life: David Frost. A controversial coach and agent, Frost became a mentor and father figure to Danton, though many would later label the relationship as unhealthy and manipulative. But what remains undisputed is Frost's influence over the young athlete, from the way he played hockey to the way he lived off the ice. By his late teens, Danton was effectively estranged from his parents, adopting Frost as his primary confidant and guide. The older man held significant sway over Danton's decisions and daily life, creating a bond so powerful that some, Danton's family especially, believed it crossed boundaries of normal mentorship. Meanwhile, on the ice, Mike Jefferson progressed through the junior hockey ranks. He displayed enough skill, grit, and fortitude to catch the attention of NHL scouts. In 2000, the New Jersey Devils drafted him in the 5th round, 135th overall. The franchise was known for its meticulous defensive system and emphasis on discipline, qualities that, at first glance, seemed incompatible with the chaos swirling around Danton's personal life. Yet the Devils also saw a potential spark plug, a hard-nosed forward who could disrupt opponents and inject energy into the lineup. It was during this period that Jefferson officially changed his surname to Danton. Explanations for the name change varied. Some said it was a severance from his family, whom he no longer wished to be identified with. Others suggested it was at the behest of Frost. The young forward himself offered limited insight, simply stating that he preferred Danton and that it represented a new chapter in his life. For better or worse, Mike Danton was now the name on his jersey, a fresh label for a player whose personal allegiances and psychological baggage were mounting. Though he did see NHL ice time with the New Jersey Devils, Danton often found himself clashing with the organization. His off-ice turmoil and his combative persona were not always compatible with a team that prized disciplined systems and tight-lipped professionalism. After a series of disagreements, some involving alleged insubordination and tension over who truly managed his career, the Devils, or David Frost, Danton was traded to the St. Louis Blues in 2003. The shift offered a chance to reboot. With the Blues, he found a supportive environment that was willing to look past his difficult reputation if he could provide the on-ice grit they needed. At that time, Danton demonstrated flashes of promise. In 68 games with the Blues during the 2003-04 season, he tallied 7 goals and 12 points. Modest numbers, but his physical edge and relentless forechecking endeared him to certain fans and teammates. He displayed a willingness to stand up for skilled players, mix it up in the corners, and stir the pot in scrums. Still, rumors and controversy tailed him everywhere. Undercurrents about his fraught relationship with Frost, whispers of personal problems, and a hot temper that sometimes flared during practices and games. However, few could have predicted the earth-shattering event that would soon unfold. In April 2004, just days after the Blues season ended, Mike Danton was arrested by the FBI on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. The case sent shockwaves through the hockey world. The complaint alleged that Danton sought to hire a hitman to kill a man described as a stalker, though many speculated this stalker was in fact David Frost himself, or possibly Danton's estranged father, Steve Jefferson, depending on the source. Even the prosecution's evidence left confusion about who the intended target truly was. Initial media coverage portrayed the story as bizarre and sensational. An NHL player, just 23, faced the possibility of life in prison. The legal proceedings were fraught with uncertainty. In July of that year, Danton pleaded guilty, avoiding a lengthy trial but leaving countless questions unanswered. The official record indicated that Danton had orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot, believing his target to be a menace to his well-being. According to various accounts, he feared for his life after a heated argument in his apartment. Some journalists hypothesized that Danton was under such psychological control by Frost that he acted out of severe paranoia or desperation. Others suggested that Danton's troubled family history factored heavily into the scenario. Whatever the truth, the court accepted his guilty plea, and Danton received a sentence of 7.5 years in federal prison. With that verdict, an extraordinary fall from grace was sealed. Only a season prior, he had celebrated goals in the NHL. Now, he was shackled and facing years behind bars. Public sentiment ranged from shock and pity to scorn and disbelief. Teammates described Danton as a misunderstood figure, a young man who carried emotional scars. Yet the seriousness of the crime overshadowed any sense of sympathy among the broader hockey community. Even so, as the months passed and Danton settled into the reality of prison life, seeds of transformation began to take root. During his time in prison, Mike Danton embarked on a journey of introspection and self-improvement. Enrolling in correspondence courses, he studied psychology and sociology, seeking to understand his own behavior and mindset. In interviews granted from behind bars, Danton spoke calmly about his desire to rehabilitate himself, acknowledging that he had harbored irrational fears and had made catastrophic mistakes. He communicated a readiness to mend certain relationships, including those with members of his family. Some believed these efforts were sincere. Others saw them as a strategy to reduce his sentence. The swirling controversy of David Frost did not subside. Frost himself faced criminal charges in unrelated incidents involving sexual exploitation of minors, allegations tied to his time as a junior hockey coach. In a separate set of legal battles, Frost was eventually acquitted, but the details of his relationship with Danton continued to surface, with various testimonies painting conflicting pictures. That Frost exploited young players, that he manipulated Danton, that Danton was confused or even traumatized. Regardless, Danton's prison years distanced him from that world. As time wore on, he claimed to have cut ties with Frost, no longer wanting him in his life. His focus, Danton said, was on self-awareness and a fresh start. In 2009, after spending more than 4 years incarcerated, some of it in the United States before he was transferred to a Canadian facility, Danton was released on parole. By then, he was in his late 20s, a critical stage for a professional athlete's career. While most hockey players in their mid to late 20s are in their prime, Danton had not played a competitive game in years. He was out of shape, rusty, and burdened by the stigma of a felony conviction. Many assumed that even if he managed to step back on the ice, it would be at a modest semi-professional or recreational level. Yet Mike Danton had a different plan. He enrolled at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, taking advantage of Canadian Inter-University Sport (CIS) rules that allowed him to play at the collegiate level while completing his education. The decision raised eyebrows. A former NHL player, a convicted felon at that, was suddenly lining up with university students. But the CIS granted him eligibility, acknowledging his right to pursue an education and rehabilitate his life. For Danton, it was a lifeline, a chance to finish the degree he'd begun through prison correspondence and to prove he still had something left on the ice. The transition was not easy. Danton had to adjust to the rigorous training demanded by a competitive college program and deal with a media circus whenever he touched the puck. Every game was scrutinized. Reporters questioned whether his presence was appropriate or if it overshadowed the team's student athletes. He responded with humility, expressing gratitude simply for being allowed to skate again. In interviews, he spoke about learning discipline and accountability in prison, about the desire to mentor younger teammates and steer them away from the mistakes he had made. The Mike Danton who emerged wore a softer edge. He was still driven, but now as much by gratitude and repentance as by ambition. On the ice, he impressed coaches and teammates with his skill, game sense, and grit. As the 2009-10 season progressed, Danton played a key role for the St. Mary's Huskies, helping them capture an AUS Atlantic University Sport Championship and even a CIS University Cup. Fans who had once written him off began to see him as a redemption story. Meanwhile, critics remained cautious, unsure whether his transformation was genuine or if another controversy lurked. Yet those who interacted with him daily at St. Mary's described a man devoted to fitness, academics, and giving back to the community. Some of his younger teammates benefited from his experience, hearing cautionary tales of an NHL dream cut short by poor judgment and toxic relationships. Despite the progress, the specter of Danton's criminal past followed him. When he attempted to travel for away games or tournaments outside of Canada, legal hurdles often arose. Parole restrictions limited his movements, and complicated paperwork was required for even routine border crossings. This scrutiny served as a constant reminder that, no matter how many goals he scored or how many classes he aced, he would forever be tied to a crime that once shocked the hockey world. Undeterred, Mike Danton continued to express a desire to play professionally after his stint with St. Mary's. In 2011, he ventured overseas to Europe, signing contracts with various teams in lower-tier professional leagues. These sojourns allowed him to keep playing, stay in competitive shape, and collect a modest paycheck. While it was far from the NHL spotlight, it was still a triumph for a man who had been behind bars just a few years prior. By the mid-2010s, Danton had played for several European clubs and maintained decent performances, though none close to the top-tier leagues. Periodically, rumors surfaced of him wanting to return to North America, maybe to play in an AHL or ECHL capacity, or to find a role in hockey development. But the baggage he carried likely kept many teams wary. In addition, by his early 30s, the window for an NHL comeback was all but closed. Instead, he leaned into the story of redemption he'd cultivated. He made appearances at youth hockey camps, where he stressed the importance of making good life decisions, choosing mentors carefully, and understanding that talent alone cannot overshadow legal and moral obligations. Mike Danton's story may never fit neatly into the mold of a triumphant sports narrative. The typical arc of adversity in the athletic world rarely includes federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Yet, at the same time, his life underscores the potential for rehabilitation. It challenges fans, teams, and leagues to ask hard questions. When a troubled athlete commits a serious crime, is he or she deserving of a second chance? How responsible should the NHL or junior systems be for the personal well-being of their players, especially minors thrust into intense competition and potential exploitation? And does an athlete's on-ice success or contrition ever fully erase or balance out the severity of past misdeeds?